My name is Donna Harris. I'm 38 years old, and for most of my adult life, I believed I understood what stability felt like. I bought my home long before I met my boyfriend Marcus Hale, and I poured myself into it, every plant in the garden, every book on the shelves, every creak I memorized like a heartbeat. It wasn't just a house. It was the one place I trusted to stay mine. Marcus and I had been together for almost a decade. We weren't married, but we'd built a life together that carried the weight and routines of one. He was warm grounded, and at least I thought unshakably loyal. When he moved in, he always told me he felt grateful to be part of a home I worked so hard for. And for a long time, that was enough. The trouble began with his parents, Albert and Evelyn Hale, long before they physically stepped into our home. They lived about 20 minutes away in a big, aging house they refused to part with. But even from a distance, their personalities reached us commentary on everything from Marcus's career choices to the brand of laundry detergent we used. I always smiled, nodded, handled them graciously. Families can be difficult. I understood that. But then 6 months ago, Albert had what everyone now dramatically calls the health scare. It wasn't life-threatening. It wasn't even serious. But Evelyn spiraled into panic like the sky had fallen. Suddenly, their sprawling home was too much work and they couldn't manage on their own. Their solution wasn't to hire help downsize or consider senior communities. No, their solution was to move in with us. I suggested delicately at first some really wonderful assisted living places nearby. They had pools, classes, game rooms. One even had a small putting green, which I thought Albert would adore. But the reaction I got was the kind of horrified gasp someone might make if I suggested throwing them into a river. Marcus was caught in the middle. He'd wring in his hands and say, "They just love us so much, Donna. They're scared." And I knew what he meant. I also knew what he wouldn't say out loud. His parents were experts at emotional manipulation. The pressure built. Tears flowed mostly. Evelyn's guilt was served in generous helpings, and Marcus kept looking at me like I held the key to ending everyone's suffering. Eventually, against every instinct in my body, I said yes. We had a guest suite downstairs with its own bathroom and a sitting area. I convinced myself it would be temporary, manageable. And for about a month, it almost was. Then came the suggestions. You know, Donna, Evelyn would say, peering into my spice rack, a woman who takes pride in her cooking keeps her spices alphabetical. It shows discipline. Albert sipping Marcus's aged whiskey. My whiskey would glance at the driveway and mutter, "Your concrete's uneven." A real woman would have had that resurfaced by now. Marcus works too hard to come home to a house that looks tired. It escalated quickly. I'd come home from work to find the living room rearranged for better energy flow. They replaced my vibrant roses in the garden with beige shrubs because the roses were too loud. And one afternoon I found my grandfather's antique armchair shoved into the garage like it was trash. I confronted Marcus gently. "Marcus, they're redecorating our home and drinking everything we own," I said. He'd give me that pained smile. "Donna, they're adjusting. It's hard for them." But it wasn't hard for them. They were thriving. The breaking point came one Tuesday night. I'd cooked dinner, a creamy mushroom risotto I was genuinely proud of. Albert poked at it like it might bite him. "Bit mushy, isn't it? In my day, women didn't fuss around trying to be gourmet cooks. They kept things simple and hearty." Evelyn chimed in without looking up from her plate. "Marcus, honey, you look pale. Donna, are you making sure he gets enough protein?" Marcus stayed quiet, too quiet. After dinner in our bedroom, I tried again. "Marcus, this isn't sustainable. This is my home. We need boundaries." He looked at me, and I'll never forget it. His expression was flat calm, like he'd practiced what he was about to say. "Donna," he said carefully, "I've thought about this, and I've made a decision." I waited. My parents have been through a lot. They have wisdom and experience we don't. So, from now on, they'll be making our household decisions. All of them. Finances, groceries, schedule, everything. They know what's best for us. For a moment, I wondered if I misheard him. But no, he meant every word. The world didn't crumble. It crystallized. I looked at him, my partner of 10 years, and felt like I was staring at a stranger wearing his face. Somewhere between the beige shrubs and the criticism at dinner, something inside my chest had gone cold, a block of ice where warmth used to be. But I didn't scream or cry or throw anything. I nodded. "Okay," I said quietly. Relief flooded his face. "Thank you for understanding, Donna. This will make things so much easier." Yes, I thought, easier indeed. Because in that moment, one truth settled into me, like a stone at the bottom of a lake. If he wanted to hand over our lives to his parents, then he no longer deserved to be part of mine. I just needed to move very, very carefully. The next morning felt different. Not in any physical way. The sun still sliced through the curtains. The kettle still hissed its way up to a boil, but something in the air had shifted. The Hale parents floated around the kitchen like they'd been crowned overnight. Marcus looked strangely lighter, as if a burden had been lifted. I watched the three of them move around my kitchen, deciding my breakfast plans, and thought, so this is what it feels like to become a visitor in your own home. I didn't push back. That was the new rule, and following it would be the key to my escape. Albert's first decree came before I finished my tea. Donna, he announced, adjusting the belt of the bathrobe he had helped himself to from the linen closet. Marcus's mother and I have agreed that your cycling hobby is dangerous. Women your age break bones more easily. It's impractical and risky. We'll be selling the bicycle today. I stared at him calmly. My bicycle, my pride, the one I saved for nearly a year to afford, wasn't just exercise, it was therapy. But I didn't argue. Oh, I said softly. All right. He blinked, almost disappointed that I hadn't fought back. Good. Glad someone's being sensible. That afternoon, I found Albert in the garage photographing my bike and posting it online for a comically low price. To make the sale go faster, he proudly explained. A buyer was already on the way. I nodded again. Let him have his moment. He had no idea what was coming. Over the next week, the Hale parents tightened their grip. Evelyn replaced my carefully balanced grocery list with her version, an apocalypse of bran flakes, prunes, and canned soups. Meanwhile, she helped herself to a pair of orthopedic slippers charged to the joint card. Fiscal responsibility, Donna, she lectured, is what keeps a household running smoothly. Marcus beamed at her like she'd solved taxes. I learned to keep my reactions small, my steps quiet. I moved like someone in a house full of sleeping animals. Any disturbance would give away what I was planning, because I had already begun. On Thursday afternoon, I spent my lunch break meeting with a lawyer, a brisk, razor-sharp woman who looked like she'd eaten 3 divorces for breakfast. When I explained that the house was mine alone, purchased years before Marcus entered my life, her eyebrows shot up. And now he's giving his parents full control, she asked. Yes, and you've documented their behavior. I'm documenting everything, I replied. Good. She slid a notepad toward me. Keep doing that. Every text, every receipt, every insult, every overstep. I nodded. Donna, she added, I want you to understand something. You aren't trapped. You're simply outnumbered in a temporary arena. But the deed is yours. That's leverage most people would kill for. Her words settled into me like armor. After the meeting, I opened a new bank account at a completely different bank. Then I rerouted my direct deposit to it. Within 2 days, all my incoming money was flowing quietly into a space Marcus and his parents knew nothing about. I wasn't doing anything illegal. I was simply reclaiming what was already mine. Next, I logged into the joint credit card account. I didn't report the elderly slippers as fraud, but I did lower the card's spending limit so drastically that the next grocery trip was going to be very interesting. And then with one click, I removed Marcus as an authorized user. Processing in 24 to 48 hours. The system informed me. Perfect. By the time they realized it, it would be too late. When Albert sold my bicycle later that week, he strutted into the house with a wad of cash like a triumphant gladiator returning from battle. Here you go, he said, handing me the stack of bills. Proceeds from your bike. I got a great offer. He hadn't. He'd sold it for a quarter of what it was worth. Thank you, I said. That night, after they were all snoring under my roof, I used the money as a down payment on a newer, better model of the exact same bike. I charged the rest to a brand new credit card opened the same afternoon as my secret bank account. Delivery was set for next week. Not to the house, to a P.O. box. I smiled as I confirmed the order. Let them think they won. The first sign that the Hale dictatorship was cracking came one evening when Evelyn screeched from the living room, Marcus. The internet is broken. Fix it. I was in the kitchen making myself a sandwich with the groceries I kept hidden in a cooler in my trunk. Can't, I called back. Bill probably wasn't paid. A heavy silence fell across the house. Then the sound of footsteps, Evelyn's dramatic gasps, Albert's grumbling, Marcus's soft panic approached the kitchen. Donna, Marcus said carefully, Our bank app says the joint account is empty. Gone, Evelyn snapped. Albert squinted at me. What did you do? I looked at Marcus, not them. My paycheck gets deposited on the 25th, I said innocently. It should be in there. Marcus swallowed, but it isn't. I shrugged gently. Well, I replied, remember what you said. Your parents are making all the household decisions now. Maybe you should ask them. The three of them froze. For the first time, Marcus looked unsure. Not angry, not authoritative. Just scared. Good, I thought. Let the cracks show. They'd spent weeks acting like they ran the home. They would soon realize they didn't even run their own lives. Over the next few days, the house became a pressure cooker. Bills bounced, auto payments failed, tension seeped into every hallway. Marcus's parents whispered in frantic tones. Marcus paced endlessly. Evelyn prayed over the TV remote like it might resurrect the Wi-Fi. Meanwhile, I remained serene, unbothered, quiet. Because I wasn't living in their world anymore. I was already building the next one. On Saturday morning, while they sat in a panicked huddle in the living room, I went into my office and printed 3 envelopes. 2 were official 30-day eviction notices. 1 was a letter addressed to Marcus. I placed them gently on the coffee table like gifts. And then I stepped back, hands folded, watching as everything I'd built, every quiet rebellion, every calculated move, finally clicked into place. This time I didn't feel cold. I felt powerful. Albert was the first to react. He grabbed his envelope with stiff fingers, opening it with an authority he clearly believed he still possessed. His eyes darted across the page. The change in his face was immediate. Red, drained to gray pride, crumbled into panic. He stared at the words like they were written in a language invented specifically to ruin his life. Eviction, he croaked. You're evicting us. Evelyn leaned over his shoulder and let out a gasp so sharp it could have cracked glass. Donna, sweetheart, this must be a misunderstanding. You wouldn't do this. Not to family. I met her eyes without blinking. It's not a misunderstanding. Marcus still hadn't opened his envelope. He held it like it contained poison. When he finally tore it open, his jaw tensed, and I watched his expression shift from confusion to fear to a kind of fragile disbelief. You're ending it, he whispered, reading the final lines. You're ending everything. Yes, I said. You met with a lawyer, his voice cracked like thin ice. I did. When his voice grew smaller, when did you start planning this? I didn't look away. The day you handed our lives over to your parents. The room fell silent in a way that felt cold and echoing, like a church, after the congregation has gone home. Albert slammed his notice onto the table. This is outrageous. We made decisions for this house. You made decisions I corrected for something that was never yours. Evelyn stepped forward with trembling hands. Donna, you're being emotional. We can work this out. If I were emotional, I said quietly, I'd be yelling. I'm not. I'm done. Marcus's eyes were glossy, but he didn't reach for me. He looked like he wanted to, like muscle memory, was trying to guide him back into a role he no longer deserved. But even he knew something had shifted that couldn't be put back. Albert stormed down the hallway, slamming the guest room door. Evelyn followed behind him, muttering about betrayal morality, the downfall of society, any narrative that didn't require her to examine her own choices. Marcus stayed in the living room for a while, standing completely still, staring at the letter in his hands. Donna, he tried again. This is too far. No, I said. This is the natural consequence of every choice you avoided making. Over the next 3 days, the house turned into a strange limbo. Suitcases began appearing in the hallway. Whispered conversations drifted through the vents, accusations, guilt trips, frantic negotiations among the 3 Hales, each trying to rewrite the past in a way that made them victims instead of architects of their own collapse. Marcus swung between pleading and silent brooding. Albert tried intimidation. Evelyn wrote me 3 long notes on floral stationery, each more dramatic than the last. I ignored all of it. On the morning of the 3rd day, I walked into the kitchen to find them all sitting around the table. They looked exhausted, hollowed out, beaten not by me, but by reality finally catching up to them. Marcus's hands were clasped tightly in front of him. He lifted his eyes when I walked in. Donna, he said barely above a whisper, you don't have to do this. We can fix things. You had months to fix things, I replied. You chose not to. We're losing everything, he said, breaking. Please. You lost me long before these papers, I said. This is just the part where you finally notice. Albert pushed his chair back hard enough that it screeched. You're heartless. Absolutely heartless. No, I said. I'm finally done giving chances to people who use them as permission to hurt me. Evelyn burst into tears. Real or theatrical, I couldn't care less anymore. Late afternoon sunlight spilled through the windows, and for the first time in months, the house didn't feel suffocating. It felt like it was breathing again, preparing for the moment it would be fully mine once more. 2 days after they left, my phone rang. I recognized the number. I let it ring once before answering. Marcus's voice came through the receiver in a rush of tears and desperation. Donna, please pick up. We need help. I stayed silent long enough for him to realize I wasn't going to react impulsively. We're at the Happy Traveler Inn, he said, choking on the words. The power in the room got cut off this morning. The front desk locked us out. My parents' cards were declined. They don't have anything, Donna. Nothing. In the background, Evelyn was sobbing loudly. Albert sounded like he was cursing the universe fate every force except the one in the mirror. You left us with nothing, Marcus said. Please just let us come home. Just for one night. We can talk. My mind traveled back through every moment I'd tried to reason with him. Every time he stared at his plate while his parents belittled me. Every time he'd mistaken my cooperation for surrender. Every time he'd silently stood by while Evelyn rearranged my home and Albert insulted my work. If the past had been a series of small cuts, this phone call was the final stitch. No, I said. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Donna, he begged. Please, we're out of options. You made your decision, I said, and they made theirs. You don't get to undo it because the consequences finally showed up. This isn't fair, Evelyn wailed in the background. It's exactly fair, I replied, my voice steady. You all insisted on controlling a life that never belonged to you. Now you're living the life that does. Marcus's breathing hitched. So that's it. That's it. I hung up. The house around me was silent. Not hollow, not lonely, simply quiet in a way that felt like exhaling after being underwater too long. The silence wasn't threatening anymore. It felt like peace. When I hung up on Marcus, the silence settled into the house like a soft blanket. Not heavy, not hostile, just present. For the first time since the Hales had invaded my home, the air didn't feel like it was shaking under the weight of someone else's expectations. I walked through each room, slowly touching the corners of tables, smoothing pillows, feeling the strange lightness of being alone again. It wasn't happiness yet, but it was the absence of dread, which sometimes feels even better. Monday morning, I met with my lawyer again. She skimmed the eviction documentation, the timeline I'd recorded, the bank statements showing how neatly the financial boundaries were drawn. When she finished, she tapped her pen twice on the folder. Donna, she said, you've done everything correctly. This is airtight. Good, I answered and meant it. She helped me file the legal notices, the dissolution of joint accounts, the official paperwork that would ensure Marcus would never again have any claim to my home, financially or otherwise. We weren't married, but 10 years. Leaves a mark on your routines, your paperwork, your life. Undoing it felt strangely surgical, precise, clean. By the time I drove home, the sun was low, casting orange light across the dashboard. The house looked different from the outside, still mine, but no longer shared space. I parked, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. Missed call. Marcus. Missed call, Marcus's number again. Text from Evelyn. You have destroyed this family. Text from Albert. We will not forget this. I turned off my phone. The next morning, I woke up to banging. Not polite knocking, the kind of pounding that insisted the world owed the person on the other side something. I opened the door to find Marcus standing there, unshaven eyes, swollen shoulders hunched. Behind him stood Evelyn, wrapped in a thin coat, hair disheveled. Albert loomed behind them, glaring like he was ready to accuse the sky of treason. Marcus stepped forward. Donna, please, we need to talk. No, I said. He blinked, thrown off by the simplicity of the word. Just listen, he pleaded. We stayed at the motel last night. It was awful. The room next to us had someone screaming until 3 a.m. The heat didn't work. My dad tried to fix the thermostat and short-circuited the entire floor. That sounds unfortunate, I said flatly. Albert pushed past Marcus. You will let us in. This is unreasonable. I blocked the doorway. You are no longer welcome here. Evelyn clutched her arms. Donna, dear, we can make this right. Let us inside. Just for a minute. It's freezing. Her voice trembled, but the moment I hesitated, she slid a glance toward Marcus, a tiny, triumphant look. She thought she had found an emotional thread to pull. No, I repeated. Marcus exhaled sharply. Frustration, finally breaking through. Why are you being like this? I said I was sorry. You weren't sorry when you handed over our life to them, I said. You weren't sorry when they uprooted my home. You weren't sorry when they sold my bicycle or threw away my garden or turned this place into a retirement purgatory. You were relieved. Donna, you didn't want a partner, I continued. You wanted a referee, someone to keep the peace so your parents never had to be challenged. Albert's voice boomed. Enough of this. We're coming inside. No, I said again, and the next time you raise your voice at my door, I will call the police. He froze. The air shifted. The power balance finally clicked into place. Marcus looked at me with something between heartbreak and disbelief. So that's it. After everything. 10 years. 10 years, I said softly, and you broke it in 10 minutes. His face tightened. His mouth opened, then closed again, like he was trying to catch words that could save him. But there were none left. He had used them all on his silence when I needed him most. Evelyn let out a wail and sank onto the porch step like she was auditioning for a tragic stage play. Albert muttered angrily under his breath. Marcus stared at me one last time, something inside him crumpling, then turned away. They walked down the driveway slowly, a small broken procession heading nowhere. I closed the door gently, not slammed, not locked with shaking hands. Just closed. The kind of closure that comes from a door that finally belongs to you again. That afternoon, I moved through the house with purpose. I collected every object the Hales had replaced or rearranged, every beige item, every stifling candle scent Evelyn insisted made the house inviting, every ugly throw pillow Albert claimed was gender neutral. I piled them all in bags and carried them to the curb. Then I went into the garage and pulled my grandfather's antique armchair back inside, brushing off the dust it had accumulated while they'd tried to erase it. I put it in its old spot in the living room. Then I sat in it. And for the first time in months, I felt like myself again. The legal process moved quickly after that. My lawyer handled the paperwork with the precision of a surgeon. Marcus's parents attempted to fight the eviction, but they had no lease, no ownership, no rights to stand on. Their case was dismissed faster than I expected. Marcus tried calling twice more. I didn't answer. The Hales ended up moving in with Evelyn's distant cousin in another state, a cold, cramped basement, according to the grapevine. The kind of place where their constant demands and self-importance would eventually cannibalize each other. As for Marcus, I don't know where he went next. I don't need to. One evening, I walked out to the mailbox and found a small slip inside, notifying me that a package was ready for pickup at the P.O. box. My new bicycle, the one that was mine again untainted. I drove to the post office, picked it up, and strapped it to the back of my car. The metal gleamed in the late afternoon sun. When I got home, I rolled it inside the garage and leaned it gently against the wall. Not one piece of it belonged to them. The house was quiet that night, but it wasn't empty. The silence no longer felt like an aftermath. It felt like possibility. I made tea. I stood at the kitchen window. I breathed. Nothing in the house argued. Nothing criticized. Nothing rearranged itself while my back was turned. Nothing demanded to be the center of my home except me. And that was enough. Weeks passed, and the house settled into a kind of stillness I hadn't felt in years. At first, it was strange to hear nothing but my own movements, water-running footsteps on the hardwood, the distant hum of the refrigerator. There were moments I'd turn slightly expecting commentary, criticism, or Marcus's hesitant voice trying to smooth over his parents' chaos. But nothing came, just the calm. It's surprising how quickly a home remembers its real owner once the noise is gone. Every morning, I woke up and opened all the windows. Fresh air poured in, sweeping away the stale heaviness the Hales had left behind. The beige shrubs in my garden were the first to go. I dug them out one by one, each root pulled free like a small exorcism, replacing them with roses again, deep red ones that looked alive instead of apologetic. I didn't rush the process. I let myself enjoy it. Enjoying something for the first time after you've been denied, it hits differently. My grandfather's armchair stayed exactly where I'd put it, some nights when the moon was bright enough to cast light across the living room. I'd sit in it with a cup of tea and just let myself feel the quiet. Not loneliness, not emptiness, just quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like a boundary drawing itself. The legal proceedings moved faster than even my lawyer predicted. Marcus's attempt to claim some sort of partnership rights over the house was dismissed within minutes. The judge barely lifted an eyebrow before stating the obvious property bought and solely maintained by me remained mine. Evelyn and Albert tried to argue that they were tenants with established residency. The judge asked them for a lease written agreement or any documented proof that they had been granted permanent rights. They had none. The judge dismissed that case even faster. My lawyer later told me she'd rarely seen such a clean, unshakable record. Donna, she said, you didn't just get ahead of them. You outmaneuvered them months before any of them realized they were in a game. Maybe, but I didn't feel triumphant. I felt resolved. And resolution is its own kind of victory. I never contacted Marcus again, and he never tried calling after the second attempt went unanswered. I don't know where he went after the basement in whatever distant state his parents had retreated to. Part of me wondered if he ever realized the full weight of what he'd allowed to happen. Another part of me hoped he would, because maybe then he'd understand why I had to walk away. But the larger part of me didn't want to look back at all. One warm afternoon, I drove to the P.O. box and retrieved the bicycle I'd ordered. It had been sitting there for days, waiting quietly like something that knew its time with me would be better than its predecessor's fate. When I loaded it into the car, the metal gleamed in the sunlight. I brought it home and wheeled it into the garage, parking it gently beside my gardening tools. There was something symbolic in that moment, restoring a part of my life that had been taken from me not with anger, but with care. The next morning, I took it out for its first ride. The air was crisp, the sky a muted blue. The world didn't feel like it was rushing past me. It felt like it was moving with me, as if it had been waiting for me to return. I rode through quiet streets past familiar turns, feeling muscles stretch in ways they hadn't in months. It felt like reclaiming a conversation with myself. I went farther than I intended, farther than I had in a long time. By the time I rode back home, my legs were warm and buzzing. My hair swept back from the wind, my breath steady. I set the bicycle on its stand, stepped inside the house, and paused at the doorway. The home was silent. Not the heavy silence of tension or wariness, but the kind that comes after a storm, the kind that lets you breathe deeply without bracing for impact. The kitchen stayed exactly how I'd left it. The spice rack was out of order again, but in a way that made sense only to me. My books were still stacked with their mismatched corners. My mugs hung slightly uneven on their hooks. It was perfect. Later that evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls in warm gold, I sat in my grandfather's armchair and watched the light change. Shadows stretched across the room and disappeared slowly, naturally, without anyone rearranging anything to improve the ambiance. I wrapped my hands around my tea, breathing in the steam. The house held its breath with me. If someone asked me then whether I felt triumphant, I wouldn't have said yes. If they asked whether I felt angry, I wouldn't say that either. What I felt was steadiness, a kind of steadiness I hadn't realized I'd lost until it came back. You don't always notice someone's weight on your shoulders until it's gone. I thought briefly about Marcus, about the life we'd built, about the version of him I had trusted for so many years. I remembered the way he used to laugh, the small routines we shared, the softness in the early years. And then I remembered how easily he let those things be overshadowed by two people who never had to fight for their place in his life. Maybe that's what hurt the most. Not that he chose them, but that he didn't choose us. I closed my eyes for a moment and let the thought pass through me like wind through leaves. It didn't linger, it didn't bite, it simply passed. The next morning, I woke up early, stepped outside, and found the roses I'd replanted blooming small but vibrant, persistent in their color. A reminder that anything uprooted and replaced can be grown again as long as the soil is finally left in peace. I stood there in the cool morning air, letting the quiet wrap around me. Not an empty quiet, but a full one. A quiet that said, "This is yours, all of it. Not because you fought loud, but because you finally fought smart. And because you remembered what was worth protecting." I locked the door behind me when I went inside, not out of fear, but because it was my home again. And for the first time,